Please welcome Gabriel Rhodes. It's so great to be here and get to talk to you about this film. We kind of met for the first time today, but I know so many people that know you and think of you so highly, so it's really exciting to get to talk to you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
I keep like a diary of films I've watched with like little notes and stuff, and when I found I was going to be doing this, I went back and looked at what I'd written when I saw this film the first time, and one of the things was, this movie sticks the landing. And watching it in a theater, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, the ending was maybe the last thing we did. I mean, it tends to be, right? When you work on these films, you don't really kind of know what the ending's supposed to be until the last thing. And I actually went back and looked at some cuts of the film earlier today just to see where we were at in a month before we finished. And the film at that point was ending just with them burning the flat Rob. Flat Rob was the cardboard cutout of Rob, right? And it just was on the barbecue, and it was this really kind of flaccid ending. It was just kind of like, ugh, this thing just, they light it on fire, and that's the end of the film. And Garrett came in one day, and she said, yeah, I had this instinct that I want to see the whole film rewind. And, you know, as an editor, I think you go, okay, you sort of, you have to honor that instinct. And so I literally took the entire film and I processed it running backwards at 5 times of the speed, and it was ridiculous. You know, it was like you get to these interview scenes and these moments where people are talking and their mouths are running. But there was sort of something in it, and I said, give me a couple days. And I went back and I went through all of the archival again. And I thought, well, this works in the archival, you know, and certain archival works, some didn't. The stuff that you needed to sort of feel the momentum of it going backwards. And when I found those shots where you could feel that motion, then I put those together into a sequence, and we had a couple of composers who I think crafted a beautiful score for that piece. I attempted to I think the Moonlight score, and that worked beautifully too, but they really brought it home, and the first time we watched it together, Garrett and I, was like, we knew that we stuck the landing, I guess.
I guess, well, let's just talk about the music for a second. So obviously, when I think back to this film, I remember the piano score. I'm sorry, what was the name of the, you have your composers, and then there was also the licensed music.
Yeah, it's music by an Ethiopian nun that was recorded in the late 60s. Her name, I'm going to butcher her name, but it's Emehoy Miriam Segu, I can't remember the whole name, but she's got a long 4-part name. Yeah. But she goes by Emehoy, actually. That's how we referred to her. And that music had been on a compilation called Ethiopiques of Ethiopian jazz music. It's a very unique score.
And but yeah, I guess watching it, so obviously that music's very striking. Watching it today, I was much more aware of the composed music as well, which is doing wonderful work. And I'm wondering, there's sort of like a pretty striking kind of moment. I feel like it's kind of the first third, you know, before it kind of switches over to the composed music, and then it's kind of handing back and forth. But I guess, could you talk a little bit about how you used music in the edit and like found the language of that?
Yeah, I had done, so the way this edit went was that I started in about April of 2019. Garrett came to me and said, I have this film, I've been making this film, it's a companion piece to a short film that she had made called Alone. And that film was also in black and white, and it was about a woman who was in love with an incarcerated prisoner. And this film was supposed to be the follow-up to that, where it was like, okay, now you're seeing it from the family's perspective of what it means to lose somebody into prison. And it was going to be another short, and she had shot most of what you see in this film. And just before she was finishing the edit, or you know, had peeled most of the edit, Fox Sybil came to her and said, oh, and by the way, I have a bunch of footage that I shot over the last 20 years. And she handed her a box of 80 tapes, and it's all the archival that you see in this film. And Garrett she just didn't know what to do with it. She threw her hands up and was like, I can't reconceive this film this way. And that's when she reached out to me. So we started the edit in April. The first thing I said was, let's actually try and bring this to the Sundance Labs, which were in June. So it was a very quick sort of goal we were aiming for. But I had an instinct that would be a great place to sort of workshop this film, because it was sort of abstract and we both didn't quite know how it was all going to work. And I thought, well, if we have 2 months, let's see what we can do in 2 months and see if we can get in. So in 2 months, I basically temped out all the music and cut a version of the film that actually, when I look back on it today, I was like, oh, it was actually not the same film, but it had a lot of the same pieces. And we screened that at the labs, and that was where we really started to work together. And so all that temp that I had done was just all wrong. It all felt kind of overly sentimental and, just leaning a little too hard on the music. And Garrett actually came in one day and said, I just heard this music by this Ethiopian nun, and we started playing with it, and I was like, this is perfect. This music's great. And we started replacing some of the temp, and then we started replacing more of the temp, and then more of the temp, and then Garrett was just like, let's just throw it all in. Let's just use all of what we have of hers. And we scored the entire film with it. But at one point or another, it became clear that there needed to be another tone and texture. And so that's when I started temping with sort of what became the composed stuff that sort of counterbalances some of that piano.
Could you tell me some more about the Sundance Labs experience? So you told me beforehand it was 10 days. So you take a rough cut of the film there, is that right? Or rough cut, fine cut? Where would you say you were at that stage?
I would call it like a 3/4 cut. It was kind of like, it was the bones of the film. And what I knew that we needed to do first was just to get the narrative out of the way, because there really was no like narrative in the film that she had made. It was just sort of like an experience. And I felt like, well, you're not going to be able to sit through a feature unless you kind of have a sense of how this journey began, what this journey has been for her, over the course of 20 years, for the children. How are we going to get these voices in? So I sort of built the cut around that. So the pieces were there. We screened it for, a bunch of mentors and a bunch of other projects that were there at the same time. And then that was the only time that Garrett and I worked in the same room together for the edit. We worked remotely entirely because she was working on art projects at the same time as well as other film projects, and we would just tap into each other remotely, and then at the very end of the project we were able to touch base again. But the labs really gave us that space to be together in the same room for the first time, and it actually was only about 8 days together.
Oh, wow. Okay. And you're watching other films there as well?
You're watching other films and talking to these incredible, gurus that really shepherd a lot of projects through there. And so they really were able to sort of ask some piercing questions about the projects. And I went back and looked at my notes, and they asked all the right questions. They really did provoke us into understanding some of the pieces. You might remember that one scene where Sybil is in the church and she apologizes to her church family. Mm-hmm. That scene only came into the film because of the labs. Like in the conversations we were having with people, they were kind of like, I don't get it. It's like she just seems so self-centered and da-da-da. And, I sort of said, oh, there was this one moment, and then that became kind of the centerpiece, the core of another restructure, because everything kind of tilts towards that and then falls off the backside from that moment a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like Sybil's such an amazing character. Like she's striking from kind of the first moment you see her. And she just comes across so strongly, and you're just on this ride with her. And I feel like there's like these two really potent emotional fulcrums, and like that's one of them, and the other is kind of that moment of like real rage you see in her right at the end.
That was another one that, like, when I watched that scene, because Garrett shot quite a few phone calls, that you only see a few of them in the film, but that was really a lot of the content that she had filmed. And I knew that the film could only hold so many of them. And so figuring out where they would fall and pacing them, like that first one is so long that you're sitting there. And I think it had to come in the right place, and it had to slow you down. It has to readjust your brain so you understand this is what you're watching. This film is about time. This film is about sitting in the moment and watching her face and feeling everything that you understand at this point, in that shot. And I knew the last one was going to be that moment when she transforms, when she's been holding it all in and she finally breaks. I mean, it still makes me cry, that moment, because it's just, you feel her pain so dynamically in that moment. It really. So I knew that had to be the last one we would see, and I knew it had to come very close to the release, to Rob's release.
Yeah. So talking about process a little bit, or shifting to process a little bit, I read something about you, the way that you like to work I think this film is edited in Premiere, right?
This is Premiere.
And you're a big marker person. But I read something about you saying that you don't necessarily like to pull out of selects reels. You don't like to put things into categories because you feel like it sort of limits the way that you view that footage. Like once it's sorted into a bin or once it's sorted into a select sequence, then you're sort of narrowing the scope of how you're going to view the footage instead of just kind of viewing it in its totality. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about your process in that regard.
Yeah, I think my process is instinctive a little bit, and I'm maybe emotionally tuned to the footage in a way. That's how I prefer to digest it. I think my wife would attest to the fact that I'm horrible at organizing anything. So like as an editor, I'm not like an organizing editor, and I just don't think that way. I sort of ingest the material all at once. I watch it, and I have to watch the whole thing all over again, basically. And by the end of the edit, I know instinctively where things are and how to find them, but it's a bit of a mess in the beginning to get there. But like I said about some of those pieces, I can kind of intuitively understand where they're supposed to be, even from a first pass of watching footage.
Yeah. And was the film, in terms of the elements that were shot in the present day, was it entirely shot when you came on board, or was it still sort of, was Robert out yet? Was it still a developing story? Or
He had just gotten out. I think he got out in October or November of 2018, and I talked to Garrett for the first time in March of 2019.
So as you're going through that archive, are you sort of kind of instinctively latching onto moments in the home movies that sort of attach to moments that Garrett has shot? Or
Exactly. And in fact, that was the first. She said, "What do you want to do first?" And I said, "The first thing I want to do before I watch any of the footage you shot is watch the archival." I had an instinct that was going to be the heart and soul of the film, and I think that proved to be true. The stuff that she shot, I knew would sort of hang on that emotional structure. I see it as like an emotional structure, and the emotions were trackable through the archive, right? You could feel that first shot of her in the opening, where she's like, "I'm gonna get you home." It's like you just feel like each scene had a certain emotion to it, And when I watched them, I just sort of knew like that feels like an opening. It feels like this thing that sort of pulls you in, and you're on her side. And then there were certain other scenes where she's a little more desperate, and sort of tracking those emotions as she went through the 20 years and sort of understanding where they fit.
I guess one other thing I wanted to talk about is just the pacing of the film in terms of, you already touched on it, but just the way, it has such its own kind of like how do I articulate this? It really lulls you into its universe. It becomes a film that is like so deliberately paced. It feels like very free and specific, but I know that every shot is sort of like specifically structured in a way, like that moment where we just kind of hang on her face in the call and we're cutting away to her son. What was the process like of sort of discovering how long you wanted to live in a moment or live on a shot or
I mean, there's a lot of editors in the room, right? So you guys, I'm assuming, because I still feel this way when I watch it. It's like, why doesn't it cut now? Why doesn't it cut? That was my instinct at first when I started working with Garrett, and she's an amazing collaborator. She's a great filmmaker, and she taught me. She basically taught me sort of the language of what we were aiming for. So there was conversations where we were working remotely. This was before the pandemic, right? So working remotely wasn't fluid at that time. So the way we worked was that we would get on, let's see if I can get this straight. We would get on a phone call and then we would FaceTime, I guess, through the phone also, and then videotape. Like, so we're both. I'm filming the screen, and then she would be like, "That shot there," and I'd point the cursor at it, and she'd be like, "Yeah, that one. Okay, that one." And then we'd be like, "Okay, let's unroll that 5 frames." And we did. We really went frame by frame on a lot of those calls to get the pacing down. And she would say, "Longer, longer, longer," and we would just kind of stretch them out and stretch them out. And at times, I was like, "Garrett, there's no way this can play this long," you know. But then eventually, I saw it, and once I saw it, I was like, "Okay, now I see how this is affecting me and my brain." And what it can do to an audience, and then we sort of paced out the rest of the film. But it's amazing that I haven't watched this in 4 years, and I've worked on some much faster paced films since then, and I'm still get this itch, like, oh, why doesn't it cut, you know? And you really have to get your brain back into the flow of it.
Yeah, I have to say I rewatched this morning, and then I was working today, and I found myself kind of like going onto the timeline and being like, I should hold on this a little bit longer and see what happens.
Good. If I can have that effect on the whole room now, editing will slow down across the world.
I think we want to go to the audience and see if there are any questions out here. Anyone? I see a hand all the way in the back.
Hi. That was a really great film. I wanted to ask about when you brought nature in at the end. I found that to be really effective. Like, the world was opening up, and I wanted to know, like, what brought you to that choice with, like, the clouds and stuff.
Oh, the clouds, yeah. You know, she had shot all these beautiful clouds, and there's actually a moment, it's kind of hard to hear, it was hard to hear in the theater tonight, but when she's on the phone with Rob, that one scene where she's talking to him about coming home, and she gets cut off, remember, with the prison call? He says, you know, I was looking out at all these clouds today. And so I wanted to kind of call back to that moment, but the first shot that you see of Sybil when she's in the car and she's on her way to the prison, you hear it first, right? You hear her like kind of screaming and not the scream that comes later, but she's sort of like kind of like you know, just enjoy. You can hear this joyful voice coming in, and that shot really started like the moment they were in the driving. Like they sort of, it wasn't like they set it up to go pick up Rob that day. They got a call. Rob was coming out. They called the film crew, get there as soon as you can. And by the time they started filming, we were already like into that drive. So, you know, it's like one of those choices you make as an editor where you're sort of fixing something by patching it, but it also leans into the problem. So I felt like if we just sort of like give a feeling that something is about to happen before we get to that moment, it'll have that much more impact, and it'll play using the energy of that scene instead of just feeling like you're being dropped into the middle of something. So that's where the backwards clouds come, the rolling back out of Angola. All of those sort of shots were all about giving this sense of momentum into that moment when she's in the car and she's ultimately joyful about his release.
Other questions?
I got one.
My question was just being so deep into this edit and the topic of the story. How have you been affected on how you see the criminal justice system in America, and how you feel or how you hope the audience would also be affected by this story?
You know, I think one of those experiences you have with making a film like this is that you get to meet the people in the film eventually. And so when we went to Sundance, Sybil's whole family came, and they ended up having, like, they would cook seafood gumbos every night, and we would go over to their condo and hang out with them. And they're such a loving family that I think it connected me to their experience like so much more. They're really a beautiful family, and you know, how do I feel about the criminal justice system? I mean, I think it's in the film. I think it's a very, it's not really a justice system. You know, it feels like there's a lot of injustice in that system, and if this film could change people's opinions on it just by understanding the emotions around that experience, I think that would be the best thing that could come out of it. I hope it does that.
In the back there.
I'd first just like to say, man, you're crazy. That was, I mean, I don't think I've said this word since I was like 12. That film was splendid. Like, I mean,
you.
just the way.
We could put that up on the poster, you know.
I mean, you said you weren't a great organizer, but the film just oscillates between so many different motifs, different styles of film. It fluctuates from like, you know, just telling straight time versus intercutting. There's like subjective montage. I mean, there's just so much like cinematic language in this film. And again, I'm just wondering, like, at what point in the process did you and the director kind of come up with like, okay, we're gonna have this transition into this like swamp, and it's gonna fade into the prison system, and at the end we're gonna reverse the footage. It just felt like you guys had such a mastery over this time motif. I'm even wondering, at what point did you guys realize, oh, we're gonna emphasize this time motif, not just with the visuals, but with like the voiceover? I mean, there's just so much going on, man.
I think there's a question in there, I think. Well,
Sorry.
It's okay. I appreciate, thank you for saying all those great things. I think if I can answer it this way, I'll say that in my career, I've been lucky to collaborate with some really great directors. I think the collaboration with Garrett was like truly one of the greatest I could ever hope for. She and I sort of, by the end of the edit, we just spoke the same language, and I think it shows in the film. I think we finished each other's sentences in some ways by the end of it. There was something about the connection that we had and the trust we had in each other. She actually, I would actually send her the cut, and she would send me back stuff sometimes. We started bouncing it back and forth a little bit, and it just felt like a true, I understood her vision, and I think she respected mine, and I think that sort of found its way into the edit, and I hope it's splendid. Thanks for saying that.
We have to wrap up. The last thing I meant to shout out at the beginning, but I'm a huge fan of another film that you cut, Matangi Maya MIA. So if you want to go see another movie where Gabriel absolutely kills it in crafting a really human story with a wealth of archive, go home and check that out. But thank you for joining us at the screening. Please join us in the lobby for a drink. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.